Let's get right into it. Number 8. Professional thinkers with no jobs. Imagine living in a society where your full-time occupation is thinking, not coding, not farming, not replying to emails, just walking around in a bathrobe, arguing about reality, and occasionally annoying strangers in public squares. That was basically the business model of Socrates. Ancient Greek philosophers didn't know everything because they had secret lost technology. They knew a lot because they had something modern humans treat like a rare collectible Pokemon card: time. Specifically, uninterrupted, boredom-filled time with zero notifications. Many of these guys weren't grinding 9-to-5 jobs. Wealthy patrons funded them, students paid to listen to them, or they were rich enough to not work in the first place. When your daily schedule isn't wake up, commute, stare at screen, repeat, your brain starts wandering into dangerous territory like, what is justice? And why do we exist? And is that cloud shaped like a goat, or am I losing it? Plus, Greek culture valued debate the way modern culture values Wi-Fi. Public argument wasn't rude, it was entertainment. Philosophy wasn't a niche hobby, it was intellectual street fighting. So while you were hypothetically busy figuring out how to pay rent, they were busy inventing logic, ethics, political theory, and the concept of annoying people by asking, but what do you really mean? In other words, they weren't smarter because they had better tools. They were smarter because they had fewer distractions and way too much free time to overthink existence. Basically, ancient philosophy is what happens when boredom reaches nuclear levels. Number 7. They observed everything. Picture being stuck without Google, YouTube tutorials, or that one friend who somehow knows everything. If you want answers, you have to stare at the world like it personally owes you an explanation. That's exactly what thinkers like Aristotle did. The man basically treated reality like a giant science project with no due date. He dissected animals, cataloged plants, studied politics, analyzed drama, and tried to classify literally everything. If it existed, Aristotle wanted to label it, sort it, and put it into a mental filing cabinet labeled stuff that exists. Without technology, observation becomes your superpower. You notice patterns modern people walk past while looking down at their phones, how seasons change, how animals behave, how people lie, how power works, how crowds turn into mobs faster than milk spoils in the sun. Ancient Greeks watched the sky so closely they mapped stars and predicted eclipses using math and patience alone, which is impressive considering most of us can't predict tomorrow's weather even with apps screaming at us. Observation also meant trial and error, lots of error, sometimes hilariously wrong error. Aristotle believed heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones, a claim later destroyed by a guy dropping stuff off a tower centuries later. But the important part is that he was trying to explain the world systematically instead of shrugging and saying, magic. When you have nothing else, paying attention becomes your main research tool. Your eyes are your laboratory, your brain is your database, your memory is your cloud storage, except it crashes permanently if you forget something. So they knew a lot not because they had machines, but because they were forced to actually look at reality instead of scrolling past it. Basically, ancient philosophy is just weaponized curiosity with no off switch. Number 6. Math was their superpower. Before calculators, spreadsheets, or that one student who somehow does everything in their head, math was basically wizardry. Not the flashy wand kind, the terrifying this guy can predict reality using triangles kind. Enter Pythagoras, a man who looked at a right triangle and said, I can make this immortal, and he did. Thousands of years later, students are still being emotionally damaged by a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Ancient Greek thinkers realized something huge: numbers don't lie, don't get tired, and don't care about your feelings. If observation was their microscope, math was their cheat code. They used geometry to measure land, track the stars, design buildings, and figure out distances without ever physically walking them. It's basically intellectual teleportation. You don't go to the answer, you summon it with logic. Even more impressive, some Greeks treated math as the underlying language of reality. Not metaphorically, literally. They believed the universe ran on numerical relationships the way your phone runs on code, except their apps were triangles and circles. Without technology, they couldn't simulate things, so they abstracted them. They imagined perfect shapes that don't exist in nature, flawless circles, infinitely straight lines, then used those imaginary objects to understand the messy real world. It's like solving real-life problems using geometry DLC installed directly into your brain. And because math builds on itself, each discovery turned into a foundation for the next one. Once you know geometry, you can do astronomy. Once you do astronomy, you start predicting eclipses. Once you predict eclipses, everyone assumes you're either a genius or a sorcerer. Honestly, if someone in ancient times told you they could calculate the size of the earth using shadows and sticks, you'd either worship them or accuse them of witchcraft. So no, they didn't have supercomputers. They had equations which, in the long run, turned out to be even more powerful. Basically, math was the original technology, except it runs on brain power and existential dread. Number 5. Knowledge was a team sport. Modern learning often looks like one person alone with a screen at 2 a.m., Googling why am I like this. Ancient Greek learning looked more like an intellectual gladiator arena. Philosophy wasn't done in isolation. It was done in groups, schools, public debates, and long arguments that probably ruined multiple dinner parties. Take Plato, who didn't just think quietly in a corner. He founded the Academy, basically the world's first long-running university, minus the crippling tuition fees and cafeteria mystery meat. Students gathered, argued, questioned everything, and challenged each other's ideas non-stop. If someone made a weak argument, it didn't get ignored, it got publicly demolished. Imagine Twitter debates, but with actual logic and fewer cat memes. This constant back and forth sharpened ideas like a knife on a whetstone. Bad theories got exposed, good ones evolved, and because many philosophers wrote dialogues instead of dry essays, their work literally preserves conversations, intellectual sparring matches frozen in text. Even teachers learned from students. One famous example, Aristotle studied under Plato, then went on to disagree with him on a bunch of things, like a respectful academic version of I love you, but you're wrong. Knowledge spread not through downloads but through people talking, teaching, traveling, and copying manuscripts by hand. Slow? Yes, but also surprisingly resilient. Ideas didn't go viral, they marinated. And when you have a culture that treats thinking as a public activity instead of a private hobby, intelligence compounds. One brain sparks another, which sparks another, until suddenly you have entire schools of thought shaping politics, science, and ethics for centuries. Basically, ancient Greek philosophy wasn't a lone genius sitting under a tree. It was more like a never-ending group project, except nobody could mute the loud guy. Number 4. They asked annoyingly good questions. Some people collect stamps. Some collect sneakers. Socrates collected uncomfortable questions like they were rare trading cards. He didn't claim to know everything. In fact, his whole thing was basically, I know that I know nothing, which sounds humble until you realize it was immediately followed by him dismantling your entire worldview in broad daylight. His method, now called the Socratic method, was basically intellectual Jenga. He'd ask simple questions, then follow-up questions, then follow-up questions, until your argument collapsed under its own contradictions. What is justice? Well, it's fairness. What is fairness? And we're done here. The genius wasn't in having answers, it was in exposing bad answers. By forcing people to define their terms, defend their beliefs, and confront logical gaps, he turned everyday conversation into a truth extraction device. And here's the wild part, this works even without technology because it runs entirely on dialogue. No lab equipment needed, just two humans and the slow realization that one of them is about to lose an argument they didn't realize they were in. This questioning mindset spread. Instead of accepting tradition or authority blindly, Greek philosophers started poking at everything: politics, religion, morality, knowledge itself. Why do we obey laws? What makes something good? Can we trust our senses? Is reality real? Or is your brain just freelancing? When a culture rewards asking why instead of just because, knowledge accelerates fast. Of course, being that guy who constantly questions everything also makes you wildly unpopular at parties and, historically speaking, sometimes gets you executed, but intellectually, extremely effective. Basically, Socrates turned curiosity into a weapon and then walked around Athens firing it at random civilians. Number 3. Memory was their hard drive. Imagine trying to preserve knowledge without books everywhere, cloud storage, or screenshots. If you forgot something important, there was no backup, just the haunting realization that your brain deleted a file permanently. So ancient thinkers trained memory like it was an Olympic sport. Before widespread writing, knowledge lived in people. Teachers memorized huge bodies of information. Students repeated it. Public speeches were delivered without notes. Entire works were preserved through recitation alone. Philosophers used structured arguments, rhythmic language, and storytelling because those things stick in your brain better than raw data. Your memory loves patterns. It hates chaos. Give it a narrative, and suddenly you can store way more information. Even after writing became common, books were rare and expensive. Copying one required actual human hands and patience bordering on sainthood, so scholars still relied heavily on memorization. And when you memorize something deeply, you don't just store it, you internalize it. Ideas become part of how you think, not just something you can look up when convenient. Modern brains outsource everything. Phone numbers? Stored. Directions? GPS. Facts? Search engine. Ancient brains were forced to keep everything in-house. It's like the difference between cooking from scratch and microwaving something. Both feed you, but one requires actual skill. Ironically, this limitation probably made their thinking sharper. When retrieval is instant, you don't analyze as deeply. When retrieval is hard, every piece of knowledge becomes valuable. So while we have infinite information at our fingertips, they had something rarer, brains trained to actually hold and manipulate it. Basically, their skulls were the original solid-state drives, except they couldn't be upgraded without decades of practice. Number 2, they stole ideas from everyone. Ancient Greece wasn't some isolated brain factory floating in the Mediterranean. It was more like an intellectual airport hub where ideas from Egypt, Persia, Mesopotamia, and beyond kept landing, refueling, and taking off again with extra upgrades. Take Thales of Miletus, one of the earliest Greek philosophers. He didn't just wake up one morning and invent science between breakfast and a nap. He traveled. He learned from Egyptian mathematics and Babylonian astronomy civilizations that had been studying the sky and measuring land for thousands of years before Greece was even a thing. Greeks were excellent borrowers, not thieves exactly, more like aggressive intellectual recyclers. They took practical knowledge, engineering, math, medicine, star charts, and asked deeper why questions about it. Egyptians knew how to measure land after the Nile flooded. Greeks turned geometry into a theoretical system. Babylonians tracked celestial movements for astrology and calendars. Greeks started asking what planets actually were and why they moved the way they did. Trade routes didn't just move spices and gold, they moved ideas. Sailors, merchants, diplomats, and scholars carried knowledge across cultures like biological vectors of nerdiness. And because Greek city-states competed with each other constantly politically, militarily, culturally, being intellectually impressive was basically a national sport. If one city had great thinkers, others wanted better ones. So Greek philosophy wasn't created in a vacuum. It was a remix album of older civilizations' greatest hits, with bonus tracks about logic, ethics, and the meaning of existence. Basically, they didn't discover everything from scratch. They stood on the shoulders of multiple ancient giants, then argued about it for the next 500 years. Number 1, they didn't know everything, they knew how to think. Here's the twist ending. Ancient Greek philosophers weren't omniscient sages with secret lost knowledge. They were humans who made plenty of mistakes, believed some truly bizarre things, and occasionally got reality completely wrong. What they actually mastered was method. Consider Aristotle again. He was brilliant, yes, but also confidently incorrect about a bunch of stuff, from physics to biology. Yet his approach to organizing knowledge, using logic, categorizing phenomena, and building arguments shaped science for centuries. The real breakthrough wasn't specific facts, it was systematic reasoning. They developed formal logic rules for valid arguments. They distinguished between opinion and justified belief. They analyzed causes, evidence, and consistency. In short, they built the operating system for rational thought. Once you have that, knowledge becomes scalable. You don't need to memorize every answer if you know how to generate answers. It's like the difference between owning a million photos and owning a camera. One stores information, the other produces it. This is why their ideas lasted so long. Even when specific claims were wrong, the thinking tools were still useful. Later scientists didn't throw Greek philosophy away, they refined it, corrected it, and built on top of it. So the secret isn't that they knew more facts than us. It's that they pioneered ways of figuring things out without relying on authority, superstition, or vibes. Basically, ancient Greek philosophers didn't hand humanity a book of answers. They handed us a user manual for the brain. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.